The shadow on the balcony. The Valorian Grand Hall had never looked more magnificent. Suspended between two moons of the Cassiari system, the station's crystalline domes refracted starlight into cascading colors, violet, gold, deep amber, all pouring across the dance floor where 1,000 beings from 40 worlds moved in ceremonial rhythm. The Festival of Aligned Stars came once every decade, and tonight every diplomat, ambassador, and dignitary in the known galaxy had come to drink, to speak, and most importantly, to dance. Ambassador Darian Cole straightened his collar and surveyed the hall with careful eyes. He was 34, dark-haired, lean in the way that came from years of tension rather than training, and possessed of the particular kind of quiet confidence that made people either trust him completely or distrust him immediately. He had been sent here by Earth's Intergalactic Relations Council to strengthen ties with the Cassiari cluster and to not embarrass humanity for once. Around him, the pairing ceremony unfolded like clockwork. The ritual was ancient. Representatives would choose partners for the ceremonial Stardrift dance, a slow, deeply symbolic waltz that, according to tradition, wove the fates of those who danced it together into the cosmic tapestry. Alliances formed on this floor had lasted centuries. Marriages had been born here, wars had been avoided. Darian watched as General Vexon of the Thurian Empire swept a willowy Cassiari delegate onto the floor. He watched as the twin ambassadors from Myrith Prime each claimed a partner with synchronized mechanical precision. He watched as even Gorak, a 7-foot boulder-like being from the sediment worlds, somehow managed to charm a petite Lunari woman into accepting his stone-gray hand. Everyone was pairing off. Everyone. And then Darian looked up. The balcony curved above the main floor like a crescent moon, draped in shadow and heavy velvet curtains the color of dried blood. And in that shadow, seated apart from the world, was a figure that made every nerve in Darian's body stand at attention. She was tall, impossibly so, draped in a gown of liquid black that seemed to breathe with her. Her skin was the pale of deep space, luminous in that cold way that stars are luminous, beautiful and distant and dangerous. Her hair fell in waves of silver white past her shoulders, and her eyes, when they caught a sliver of light, glowed. Not warmly, not invitingly. They glowed the way embers glow in the ruins of something burned. Queen Seraphine Vor of the Vethkali, the vampire queen of the Obsidian Throne, ruler of the Nightbound territories, keeper of 6 ancient seals, and the only sovereign in this hall who sat utterly, completely alone. No one approached her. Not the Thurians, not the Cassiari, not even the bold delegates from the frontier worlds. They circled the radius of her presence like moons obeying gravity, close enough to feel her pull, never close enough to be caught. Darian watched her for a long time. He watched how her fingers rested still on the railing. He watched how her eyes moved across the dancers below, not with disdain, not with boredom, but with something quieter and more devastating, longing. She wanted to be down there. She just didn't know how to want it without it costing her something. He set down his glass. His aide, a nervous young man named Toby who had the unfortunate habit of sweating at inappropriate moments, materialized at his elbow. "Ambassador Cole, you're not seriously considering." "I'm going to ask her to dance," Darian said. "She drinks blood, sir." "Good thing I have plenty." He left Toby sputtering behind him and climbed the curved staircase to the balcony. With each step, the noise of the hall faded and the air grew cooler, charged with something he couldn't name, like the feeling before a storm or the moment before a confession. He stepped into the shadow. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. He had the distinct impression she'd been aware of him the moment he made his decision. Up close, she was even more extraordinary. The glow of her eyes was the color of dying suns. Her lips were the dark red of something that didn't need to be explained, and the stillness around her wasn't emptiness. It was density, like a star collapsed into itself, all that power held in perfect, devastating stillness. Darian extended his hand, palm up. "Your Majesty," he said, "every queen deserves a dance." For a moment, one long, suspended moment where the universe seemed to hold its breath, she simply looked at his hand. Then those luminous eyes rose to his face, searching for the trick, the angle, the manipulation she had been promised by centuries of experience that always lurked behind an offered hand. She found none. Slowly, like something ancient deciding to thaw, Seraphine Vor placed her cool hand in his. Below, the hall went quiet. Then it erupted, the dance that broke 1,000 rules. They descended the staircase together, and the crowd parted the way the sea parts, not by choice, but by force of nature. Darian felt every eye in the hall tracking them, felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing against the moment like a tide against a single boat. He kept his back straight and his chin level. He was good at looking unafraid even when his pulse was doing extraordinary things. And his pulse was absolutely doing extraordinary things. Seraphine moved beside him with the fluid grace of a being who had never once in her very long life needed to hurry. Each step was deliberate, elegant, and somehow conveyed an entire history of courts attended, of centuries survived, of loneliness worn so long it had become a second skin she no longer noticed. They reached the center of the floor. The other dancers had instinctively retreated to the edges, creating a circle of space around them that felt both like a stage and like a battlefield. The music, a Cassiari string arrangement built around 7 interlocking tonal layers, shifted subtly, deepening into something slower and more resonant. Darian placed his right hand at the curve of her waist. The fabric of her gown was cool and impossibly soft beneath his palm, like touching shadow given form. She placed her left hand on his shoulder with a precision that suggested she was very carefully measuring the pressure she allowed herself to use. They began to move. Whatever Darian had expected, stiffness, the mechanical performance of an ancient ritual, dissolved in the first few bars. She danced the way she breathed, with total economy of motion, nothing wasted, everything controlled. But within that control was something extraordinary. A responsiveness, a sensitivity to his lead that told him she was paying exquisite attention to every small shift of his weight, every subtle signal his body gave. "You're surprised," she said. Her voice was low, unhurried. It carried the particular resonance of someone accustomed to speaking in large halls where silence was their only competition. "I'm impressed," he corrected. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, not quite its absence. "You're also afraid." "A little," he admitted. "Fear and attraction often travel together in my experience." Her eyes dropped to his briefly, a reflex quickly controlled. "You said attraction. I'm an ambassador. I'm paid to be precise with language." She studied him. He had the sensation of being read very thoroughly by something that had been reading people for a very long time. "Why did you come to me? The truth, ambassador, not the diplomatic version." Darian held her gaze. "Because you were the only person in that room who looked like they understood what it costs to want something you can't reach for." The music swelled. She was quiet for a long time. "That is a dangerous thing to say to me," she finally answered. "I know," he said. "I said it anyway." Around them the other couples had stopped pretending to dance. Gorak, the sediment ambassador, was openly staring. General Vexon had gone very still. In the upper gallery 3 Cassiari elders were in rapid, whispered conference, consulting scrolls that had not been opened in living memory. Seraphine Vor, queen of the Nightbound territories, keeper of 6 ancient seals, was dancing with a human. The protocol violations were too numerous to count, the diplomatic implications were seismic, and she, for the first time in 412 years, did not care. As the song moved into its second movement, something strange began to happen. Where their hands met, his palm against hers, his hand at her waist, a faint luminescence appeared, not bright, not alarming, but unmistakable. A soft, pulsing glow, the color of deep violet, spreading slowly outward from each point of contact like ink dropped into water. Seraphine went very still. Not the controlled stillness of before, this was something else. This was shock. "What is that?" Darian murmured. "The resonance," she whispered. Her voice for the first time was unguarded, raw. I haven't felt this in—" She stopped, composed herself with visible effort. "It is a phenomenon of my people. It occurs when two beings are cosmically recognized as significant to each other." Darian looked down at the glow between them. "Is it supposed to be this strong?" "No," she said very quietly, "it is not." In the gallery above, one of the ancient scrolls had fallen open on its own to a passage no living scholar had read. General Vexon was now speaking rapidly into a communications device, and Darian Cole, human ambassador and deeply curious man, tightened his hold on the vampire queen's waist and kept dancing. "So what happens now?" he asked. Her glowing eyes met his, and in them he saw something he suspected very few beings in the universe had ever been permitted to see: uncertainty. Real, naked, honest uncertainty. In a being for whom certainty had been the only armor she'd worn for centuries. "Now," Seraphine said, "everything changes. What burns between stars?" They gave her the Obsidian Suite, the hall's most remote chambers, reserved for dignitaries whose presence required particular care. Darian was assigned rooms 2 corridors away, which meant that the walk between them, made at the darkest hour of the station's rotation cycle, took exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He knew because he counted every second of it. She had asked him to come, not in words, in a single look across the banquet hall 3 hours after their dance, when the speeches were done and the formal obligations completed and everyone had retreated into their carefully maintained factions. A look that lasted no longer than a heartbeat, but it was the most direct communication he had ever received from another living being. The door to the Obsidian Suite was not locked. He pushed it open and found the room lit by a dozen thin tapers burning with deep blue flame, Vethkali fire, which did not consume but only illuminated. Seraphine stood at the far window, still in her gown, looking out at the twin moons. She didn't turn when he entered. "You came. You asked." "I didn't speak." "No," he agreed, stepping into the room and letting the door fall shut behind him. "You didn't need to." She turned then, and the blue firelight moved across her face in waves. She had unpinned her silver-white hair. It fell past her shoulders now, softer than it had looked on the balcony. She looked, Darian thought, like someone who had finally taken off a uniform they'd worn so long they'd forgotten it wasn't their skin. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Before this goes further, before you make decisions without information you deserve to have." He moved deeper into the room, close enough that the warmth from the tapers reached him. "Tell me." "The resonance is not a metaphor," she said. "It is a real and binding phenomenon. When it manifests between two beings at the strength it did tonight, it creates a connection that cannot be undone. What you feel toward me, the pull, the curiosity, the heat of it, that is not coincidence. That is the universe recognizing something." She paused. "I want you to understand that. I am not manipulating you. I am not using any ability I possess to make you feel this. The resonance is honest. It is the only honest thing I know." Darian was quiet for a moment. Then, "And how does it feel on your side?" The question seemed to cost her something. She looked away briefly, like remembering something I had decided to forget was possible. He crossed the remaining distance between them, close enough now that he could see the faint luminescence still present at the edge of her fingers. The resonance, fading, but not gone. Close enough to see that her stillness was not coldness, it was restraint. It was the particular tension of something that wanted very much to move. Seraphine. He had not used her name before. She blinked, startled, he realized. As if the simple act of being addressed personally, without title, without protocol, was unfamiliar. "Tell me what you want." The silence stretched, and then she moved. Not dramatically, not with any of the sweeping grandeur one might expect from a being of her stature and power, but simply, quietly, inevitably. She reached up and placed her hand against the side of his face, palm cool against his jaw, and looked at him from a distance of inches. "This," she said. "I have wanted this, to simply be seen as something other than what I am feared to be, for longer than your civilization has existed." He covered her hand with his own, holding it there. "Then let me see you," he said. "All of it." What happened next was slow and necessary. The kind of closeness that has nothing to do with hurry and everything to do with truth. She told him things. Not all at once, in the careful, testing way of a being who had been burned by disclosure before. She told him about the first century of her reign, when she had been young and electric with power and so desperately alone it had felt physical. She told him about the treaty she'd destroyed because she had trusted the wrong person, and how that lesson had calcified into 400 years of walls. He told her things too, smaller things, human things. The particular loneliness of being the person always sent to the edges of the known world, always the one extended toward unfamiliar darkness while everyone else stayed in the light, of being good at connection and somehow always ending up alone at the end of each assignment, of his ex-wife Elena who had said he was too comfortable with the unknown to ever fully come home. She wasn't wrong, he admitted. Seraphine regarded him with those luminous eyes. "No," she said, "she wasn't, but perhaps the unknown is simply where you were always supposed to be." Her fingers, still against his jaw, traced a slow line along his cheekbone. The resonance flared, violet light blooming at the contact, steady and warm. "The elders of your council," she said quietly, "will object to this." "The elders of everything will object to this," he said. "Are you afraid of that?" He turned his face into her palm. "Ask me again in the morning." The blue flames burned low around them, and the twin moons turned outside the window, and the universe, which had been paying close attention, said nothing. It didn't need to. It had already made its recognition known. The price of chosen stars. The morning brought the reckoning, as mornings after momentous nights are inclined to do. Darian found 17 messages waiting on his communications pad when he returned to his own suite at dawn, 3 from the Earth Council, 4 from the Cassiari Diplomatic Bureau, 2 from General Vexon's office marked urgent in aggressive red lettering, and 1, chillingly, from someone who identified themselves only as a keeper of the old pact. He read them in order, drinking cold coffee, his expression progressively settling into the focused calm of a man who has decided to be in a great deal of trouble and intends to navigate it with dignity. The Earth Council's messages were predictably anxious. What was he doing? Did he understand the implications? Please contact us immediately. The Cassiari Bureau was more formal and therefore more alarming. The pairing of a human ambassador with the Queen of the Nightbound Territories during the Stardrift ceremony had activated provisions in the Treaty of Aligned Stars that had not been invoked in 600 years. There would be a formal inquiry, his credentials might be reviewed. Vexon's messages were simple. "You have no idea what you've done, Cole. Call me." The keeper of the old pact message read, "The resonance does not lie, but the consequences of what it binds are yours to survive. Choose wisely, human. You have 3 days before the Obsidian Throne demands accounting." Darian set down his coffee and went to find Seraphine. She was in the Hall of Records, which opened at dawn for sovereign access. She stood before a massive holographic display of the Treaty of Aligned Stars, an ancient document rendered in shifting light, its thousands of clauses glowing like constellations. She had clearly been there for some time. She looked up when he entered, and the expression on her face told him she already knew everything his messages contained, and possibly more. "Sit," she said, not unkindly. He sat. She remained standing. Not from power play, he understood, but because she was the kind of being who needed to be upright when delivering difficult truths. "The clause the Cassiari are invoking," she began, "is the sovereignty exchange provision. It was written 3 centuries before I was born, during a period when cross-species alliances were considered galactic threats. It states that any sovereign who forms a resonance bond with a representative of an unallied world must either," she paused, and he saw the effort it took to keep her voice level, "dissolve the bond within 3 days, or formally extend the alliance, which means your world and mine." "An alliance between Earth and the Nightbound territories," Darian said slowly. "Yes. Earth's council won't approve that in 3 days. They barely approve anything in 3 years." "I know." He looked at her. "And dissolving the bond?" Something moved behind her eyes, fast, controlled, suppressed. "It requires severing the resonance connection, which is," she chose words carefully, "deeply unpleasant for both parties, and permanent." The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the station, a bell was chiming the start of formal diplomatic hours. Both of them ignored it. "There are others who want this dissolved," Seraphine continued. "Vexon has ancient territorial agreements with my worlds that would be complicated by a human alliance. Ambassador Priella of the Lunari Collective has already filed a formal objection. She had hoped to propose an alliance between her world and mine before this festival ended." A pause. "She is also furious with you personally. She considered your approach to my balcony a deliberate political maneuver." "It wasn't." "I know that. A beat. She doesn't." Darian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What do you want, Seraphine? Not what the treaty demands, not what your court will require, not what manages the politics most efficiently. What do you want?" The holographic treaty rotated slowly between them, its ancient clauses turning in the light. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "I want to stop having that question surprise me," she said. He stood up and crossed to her. She didn't step back. "Then let's start there," he said, and took her hand, and the resonance bloomed violet between their palms like it had no intention of being dissolved. Outside the Hall of Records, General Vexon was waiting in the corridor with 3 aides and a face full of controlled fury. Ambassador Priella was reportedly in her suite composing formal protests. The Cassiari elders had called an emergency session, and in the communications network of a dozen worlds, the news was already spreading. The Vampire Queen had chosen, and the universe was going to have to rearrange itself around that fact. Darian Cole, looking at Seraphine, Vor looking at him, found he was not particularly afraid of any of it. What the stars recognize. The formal hearing convened in the Grand Chamber at the 3rd hour. Every ambassador, delegate, and sovereign present at the festival was in attendance, some for the politics, some for the spectacle, all of them leaning into the charged air of a moment that felt, even to beings who had witnessed centuries of history, like the hinge of something. Darian and Seraphine entered together, side by side. Not touching. That would come later, in private, where things between them did not need to be performed for an audience. But together. Deliberately, visibly, undeniably together. The reaction moved through the room in a wave. Even Gorak, who was not given to strong reactions, made a sound of rumbling surprise. Elder Cassiari, Delegate Voss, a being who appeared ancient beyond calculation and moved with the particular authority of someone who had outlived several civilizations, called the chamber to order. The proceedings were conducted formally, which meant they were slow, thorough, and gave Darian the time to watch the room while Seraphine handled the protocol with the effortless command of someone who had been navigating these waters for 4 centuries. General Vexon presented his objections first. Territorial concerns, precedent, the destabilizing effect of a Vethkali-human alliance on existing power structures. He was articulate and not wrong about the complexity. Darian listened carefully and noted 3 points he intended to address. Ambassador Priella of the Lunari was next. She was formally composed and personally wounded, and both were visible if you knew where to look. She spoke of her own proposed alliance, of years of careful diplomatic groundwork, of the disruption a sudden resonance bond represented to plans made in good faith. When she finished, she looked directly at Darian with eyes that said, "I know this wasn't strategy, and I almost wish it had been. Strategy I could fight." He inclined his head toward her. An acknowledgement. She looked away. When it was Seraphine's turn, the chamber went very quiet. She rose from her seat with the unhurried certainty of a being who had never once in her long life needed to rush toward anything, and she spoke without notes, without preparation, without the careful scaffolding of diplomatic language. "I have attended 6 of these festivals," she said. "Each time I have come alone. Each time I have watched the Stardrift dance from the balcony, where no one approached me and I approached no one, because that was the agreement, the unspoken mutual agreement between myself and the rest of this galaxy. You would fear me. I would accept being feared. And we would all pretend this was simply the order of things." Silence. Not uncomfortable. Rapt. "Last night, a human ambassador climbed the stairs to my balcony and offered me his hand." She paused. Not because it was politically advantageous, not because he had been instructed to, because he noticed I was alone and decided that was something worth changing. And the universe, she looked briefly at Darian, and the resonance flared visibly between them even across the distance of the chamber, drawing a collective breath from the crowd. The universe agreed with him. She turned back to the assembly. "I have governed alone for 400 years. I have been effective. I have been, just by the standards of my world, and I have been, by every honest measure, lonely, in a way that has sometimes made me less than what I should be. I do not intend to dissolve this bond. I intend to propose a formal alliance between the Nightbound territories and Earth, and I invite all parties with territorial concerns to come to the table in the honest knowledge that what changes here changes for everyone's benefit, if they are willing to see it that way." She sat down. The chamber erupted, not in anger, not in disorder, but in the complex, layered noise of 1,000 beings, all processing an enormous thing at once. Darian leaned toward her slightly. 400 years, he said quietly. 412, she corrected, equally quiet. That's a long time to be alone. Yes, she said, it is. The deliberations took the rest of the day. There were concessions. There are always concessions. Vexon's territorial concerns were addressed with precision. Priella was invited into a 3-way consultation that would eventually lead to something no one had anticipated. A Lunary Vethkali Earth trilateral accord that would be studied by diplomats for the next century. The Cassiari elders, after consulting their ancient scrolls extensively, issued a statement that the resonance bond between Ambassador Cole and Queen Vor was unprecedented but consistent with the highest provisions of the Treaty of Aligned Stars, which was, for the Cassiari, practically a celebration. By the time the formal session closed, stars had moved in their slow paths outside the dome, and the twin moons of the Cassiari system were rising in tandem over the station's horizon. Darian found Seraphine on the balcony, the same balcony where he'd first seen her, now lit by starlight and the blue glow of Vethkali fire she'd conjured with a gesture. She was standing at the railing, looking out at the moons, and she turned when she heard his step with the ease of someone who had already learned the sound of his particular footfall. "Toby fainted during the vote," he said, coming to stand beside her. "He seems fragile." "He'll be fine. He always recovers." He leaned against the railing. Seraphine. Darian. The first time she'd used his name, he felt it the way you feel a door opening, the change in air pressure, the suggestion of space beyond. He turned to face her. The resonance between them was steady now, not flaring, settled, like a fire that has found its proper hearth. Her eyes in the starlight were the color of something ancient and honest, and when he reached for her hand, she gave it to him with the kind of ease that only comes when restraint has finally, genuinely, let go. "What happens now?" he asked. The same question he'd asked her on the dance floor, but different now, warmer, less afraid. Seraphine Vor, Queen of the Nightbound Territories, keeper of 6 ancient seals, looked at him with 412 years of careful distance finally, quietly dissolving. "Now," she said, "we find out what we are together." Below them, in the grand hall, the music had started again. The Stardrift, replayed for those who had missed the ceremony or simply wanted to dance again. And above the music, visible through the dome to anyone who happened to look, 2 stars in the Cassiari system's outer ring, previously unremarkable, catalogued simply as Vor 7 and Col 14, had drifted, for no reason that any astronomer could explain, into alignment. The universe, as it turns out, is not subtle, but it is, in its long and patient way, precise. Darian Cole pulled the vampire queen close, and she let him, and the blue fire burned warm around them both, and the stars, as stars do when they finally find what they've been moving toward, held still.